everybody. I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Well, welcome to episode 30, which I will say is our 30 also just seemed like a really good number to call the end of season 1. And so this is it. This is the end of season 1. So yay, it's been a good season. But to wrap up our beautiful season, our last guest for season 1 here is Pastor Bre Roberts, who is the pastor of Christ Evangelical Lutheran Church in Millersville, Maryland. So just right down the road. Thank you for being our honorable final guest.
Thank you. I feel very lucky.
Yeah.
Final word.
Yeah. So it's sort of winding down to the end of the church year, which for those that don't follow the church year have no idea. They're like, we still got like 2 months left in the year. What's that the church year ends approximately around Thanksgiving. So the first Sunday after Thanksgiving is Advent, which is when we start preparing for Christmas, which is actually the beginning of the church year. So we start with Jesus being born.
Yeah.
It's a good place to start. But anyways, so we're going to call this the end. And part of that has to do with Pastor AJ is just really busy, and the holiday seasons is even really busier for a pastor. And then, I'm going to have a baby, so I'm just going to be busy. So 30 episodes seems like a great first season, and we'll pick up sometime in 2022.
Woohoo.
It's a good plan.
It is good. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
30 also seems like a good number. It's a nice solid number.
Nice. Yeah. Solid. Yep. Anyways. So Pastor Bre and I are going to talk about the gospel lesson, some more Jesus, for Sunday, November 14th, for those that are going to go to church. It is Mark 13, verses 1 to 18. And it feels kind of like poetic to me to make this the last episode. It's sort of like it's kind of an apocalyptic doomsday kind of, Bible reading that we have here today. So it's going to be like, oh, well, it's the end of the world, but it's not. Anyway.
Do we feel fine? I'm not sure if I feel fine.
I don't either. I've been singing that song since like 2015, and I never can complete that sentence anymore. So anyways.
Yeah, we were lied to. I don't feel fine.
Let's talk about the end of the world. I'll read the text though. I'll read from the New Revised Standard Version. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? And what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead you astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place. But the end is still to come. For nations will rise against nations and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. But this is the beginning of the birth pangs." The gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I know there's another. Thanks be to God.
I know. Standing in a pulpit saying that, I'm like, this feels dishonest.
Every pastor out there is thinking, "Oh shit.
I have to preach something good about this crap."
The good news.
Yep. It's good. It's good in there somewhere. I love how you read it, AJ, like a Disney character at the beginning. Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings. Like, here comes Buzzkill Jesus.
I actually like just like I read like that a lot. Like, like I think I listen to too many audiobooks is the real problem. But so like on Sunday mornings, like when I read, it's like the characters have voices. So if you come to my church, you're gonna be privy to that because I can't help it. I think it makes it, it gives it a little bit more life instead of just like reading it to be like, no, man, these getting out a little tones, what they would have sounded like.
Well, and this poor disciple who's like, look, teacher, doesn't even get named. Like, this is this idiot disciple. We don't want to even give him a name. He asked this dumb question. And then like, I love the thing where it's like the other four are like, could you explain that, please? Because what?
I actually hear like in the beginning, like the voice that, because what it brings to mind is I think of Little Red Riding Hood.
Yes.
What big eyes you have, Grandma. What big nose you have. So that's what the disciples sound like to me. Little Red Riding Hood.
Little Red Riding Hood disciples. I like it. Yep.
At least the disciples in the Gospel of Mark, like most of the time.
Well, yeah, they're particularly special.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good.
So this is a fun gospel reading that I think is one of the ones that can get us a bit troubled when it like stands by itself. For folks that like to be biblical literists, which that means people who like to take whatever English version of the Bible they have and decide that this is word for word exactly what is happening and Jesus said and stuff. This is one that can, lead you down some fun paths if you read the Bible that way, which we have talked about on this podcast, that's not a very faithful way to read the Bible. As we have translations of translations, and the Bible's even been written down multiple times before it even got to the form that we had it in the Greek translation that got written down. And so it's always remember like those different pieces and aspects that go into our reading of the Bible.
And it's really,
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say it's real easy to like use it as like a check mark and be like, oh, okay, wars, check. Rumors of war, check. Yeah. Nations rising against nation, check. Okay, I'm just waiting for an earthquake and then we're ready to go. If you use
the end of the world is here.
Right, and I would like to use this to confirm my own beliefs about whatever. But yeah.
Well, so when we look into sort of that the stuff behind the text, right, that all of that's important. So we know that like the Gospel of Mark was written like right around 70 AD, like right after this temple that they're oohing and ahhing at has just been destroyed. So what's important, like, so understanding that is like the author and the author's original audience there knows that already happened. So when we read this, like that's just happened to them. Like that's just happened. So they're living in this very like immediate disaster of what's going on. And they're currently like, part of that has to do with like they're in a little bit of a war with the Roman Empire, right? Which is what leads to the destruction of the temple. So they're also living in this kind of like crazy wartime situation when they're reading this. And also, so something with that too is like, and this kind of goes along with, that the Jesus coming back thing, which goes along with this sort of like end of the world notions that we get in Christianity. They thought that Jesus was coming back like soon, like within like 10 years. Certainly
like in our bags packed. Right,
like certainly within their lifetime, right? So that makes a difference in what they're reading too.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I have been reminded of is how Mark is preaching as the evangelist to a particular community. It's not just a message for everyone. This is a contextual message for these people at this time in this place who need to hear this really strange but apocalyptic good news, like, hey, this temple is going to be torn down, and they've lived through seeing it torn down. And so Jesus is like, essentially telling them the truth in this gospel, like, oh yeah, hey, not necessarily like predicting the future, but like Jesus knows about destruction and like what living under the Roman Empire is like.
Right.
So
yeah. So that they can hear that message then reflected in Jesus's message. I think part of that is the good news right there of just a little bit of validation of hearing, those words from Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. It's not removed from their experience, but it's deeply planted in their experience. And so if Jesus understands this, then the good news is, what he tells us is faithful and, will lead us past this time, whatever's next that we don't know, that Jesus assures us of something in his presence will exist beyond now. Like the things that are bad now, Jesus already tells us that it's not going to be that way forever.
Right.
And that's like a little tiny like morsel of hope to
but in the meantime, it's going to be very painful.
It's going to suck.
So the Greek word that is translated here as the birth pang is odin, which just is like great pain, like the most severe pain that you can think of. And so most translators put that birth. Obviously, that is giving birth.
It's pretty
That's what
awful.
Jesus is talking about here. If we're talking about the greatest pain imaginable, it's birth.
It's birth. Yeah. As somebody who has given birth twice, but hasn't had a kidney stone, which apparently is really awful. So I don't ever want to do that either. For sure, it's super painful. I can confirm that. And yeah, I mean, I love that it's Jesus is speaking it. Mark is sharing the story, and then how many dudes have translated this, and they're like, "Yep, birth. That's the worst." Yep. Ever.
Because just to think about that, like it probably is men, right? And so these men are like, pain, birth, women, it's got to be birth, right? Like that's clearly
the worst thing ever.
As someone who is around 80 days away from giving birth, I'm not super excited about hearing that, right? Like,
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. My best friend just gave birth very recently, within the last couple of weeks. And it sounds incredibly horrifying. So I'm looking forward to that. It's going to be great.
I feel like labor and birth, the like worst thing and also like the most comforting thing is you can't predict what any particular labor is going to be like. And also like the only way to get through it is to get through it. But eventually you wind up through it. Like it's finite and it ends. So we were talking earlier about this slightly awkward, but hopefully helpful. And I don't know. So like,
please tell the whole story because I love it.
This is not me giving me birth advice. So the
disclaimer.
Right. This is a preaching podcast, not a labor and delivery podcast. The child who I took these birthing classes for just turned 12. So it's 12 years out of date experience. But I was in Berkeley, California, where I went to seminary, taking a Bradley method birth class in some stranger's kitchen in the hills of Oakland. And the image that our birth, very super crunchy, like imagine a hippie lady and you have nailed this woman like in your head. The image she used is to picture contractions, the things that your uterus does to push the baby out, which is why it hurts so much, as a finite like pile of things, like a pile of pickup sticks, a pile of coins, a pile of something, like something finite that you can see. There's a countable amount. And every time you have a contraction, she was telling us, visualize, take one out of that pile and put it away. And so then you have one less. You still have that pile and it feels innumerable, but it is finite. And at the end, you will have no contractions left in that pile. So by the end of whatever great ordeal you're going through, it's finite. It's a birth pang, but
there is an end. Yeah.
There's an end. And I think that's like, it's almost like I completely understand why people in certain biblical readings, like, why did it end here? This is the beginning of the birth pangs. I want to have an addendum and be like, okay, but eventually birth ends. The greatest pain you can imagine will eventually, you will eventually pass the kidney stone. You will eventually have the baby. You will eventually come through whatever great ordeal you're going through. But you have to the only way to go through it is to go through it. And there's a finite amount of pain and suffering that you have to go through. And it's not like justifying, like if there was a way, and a lot of people, like they have labors and they're easy and it's great. And that's the one you're going to have, AJ. It's going to be great. It's going to be
Yes,
awesome.
keep putting that into the universe. That's what I would agree.
Like the suffering and the pain that they're going through is finite. Like it's not going to go on forever. And Jesus has, saying to them, don't be astray.
Yeah.
Don't fall into the trap of thinking this is going to be forever or it's inevitable or whatever, but like keep, you're part of this community that exists after all these stones have been thrown down and you're still here.
Yeah. And I think it's important, like that idea of like understanding, like, yeah, it's going to be painful, but like, it's going to end. And there is hope in that. And I think especially where we sit in our 2021 world, where like, this pandemic was supposed to be like 3 months. Remember that they told us in March, it was last 3 months, last March.
And I'm like, wow, I'm like, oh, honey, no.
We were so naive. So naive. And then, and then it did it. And then we were like, oh, it's going to last until people get vaccinated.
No.
And then because, so many people refused to get vaccinated, instead it accelerated and worsened.
Right.
And so now we're living through that. And it's sort of like, how many more of these are in the pile before we get to the bottom here, right? Like,
stop adding more to my pile. I'm done. Yeah. The weirdest thing for me is I remember when like making masks and wearing masks was like this novelty. And it was like, do we have to do this? And like, it's been such a long time. My child grew out of masks that I made her, and I had to like move her up to the next size. And like, I never thought about how big my kid's face was before, right. But like weird things the pandemic has taught me, like, yeah, you will have to size up your preteen's face mask, because we're still living in this, sort of slightly apocalyptic hellscape where we're wearing masks to go everywhere. And yeah, but it's a pile, and then eventually we're diminishing it. I don't want to add anymore. I don't want to make it worse.
Well, I think you named it right. Like, it's finite. We don't know how many are in there. You don't know how many contractions you're going to have, but there is a finite amount, and you will get to the bottom.
You will eventually. Right. And I don't, like in the moment when, like this is more learning about labor. There's a stage of labor that people get to, are pregnant and are having babies. And it's called transition. And it's like when things actually get serious. And literally, like, my husband and I had to come up with a code word, because the thing that most people who are delivering will say is something like, I want to go home. Like, I'm done having this baby. But then like all the healthcare providers are like, like, this is just getting serious. Like, this is the thing that gets you to the finish line. And
the point of no return.
Right. And so our code word was, I said to him, I want to go home. And he's like, do you mean that? And I was like, no. It was like, I said it because that's like the words that felt the most right about how I was feeling, because home is the safe place. Home is the place where I can get away from this pain, but the pain, you have to go through it. And like, I don't know, I feel like, I don't want to make this all about birth, but it's Jesus' fault. He talked about it. We're the translators.
Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But like, you do labor and delivery, you do any kind of great ordeal, any suffering you go through, you don't do that by yourself. Like, like there's people who are like holding your hand and telling you, do this, no, don't push, no, stop this, put your leg here, things like that all along the way. So like, I think that's the thing for me, that's that little crumb of hope too, is this Mark community. Jesus was telling them, you're not going to be alone. There's this pain you have to go through, and you will be together, even if you all are super confused about what's happening. And you have to come and say, what did you mean, Jesus? But they're in it together, and I think that's the good thing.
Well, and I think that's the key, even for getting through, a lot of the great pains that we go through, right? Like to not do it alone. That actually to me is like, it's not that I want to equate birth and death, but I'm about to. When someone dies, right? Like that grieving process is tough. And I think it's important to like, remember, you're not alone in that like you have that support around you. And I think that like, maybe that's a little bit what the disciples need to hear here too, right? Like they need to hear like, yeah, it's going to suck, but you're not alone, right? Like there's hope in this. There's hope in my promise. There's hope in what this community is.
Right. And it's not built on finite things like an empire that's going to come and destroy your building. It's built on this relationship of interconnectedness that you have found. And it might be in a building, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and to also understand, so we, Christians understand sort of our relationship to our building, like our temple situation, much different than like the temple in Judaism, right? Like we figured out how to do church without buildings last year.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like in a way that like, I think we were always capable of doing, but
we didn't do it until we were forced. I know that for sure about my community. Like, it was like, oh yeah, we should totally do that. And now, like, someone said, are we going to stop live streaming? And I was like, no, why would
never? Yeah, this is, like 2 years ago, the only churches that like had a live stream worship were like, the mega churches, the big ones that like,
right.
And I think of a particular church that has its own app, right? Like it's, that level. And now all of a sudden it's like, oh no, we can all do this.
Right. We're at a place now where it's so much more available, and like, we all have the technology, frankly, in our pockets, and we can say, like there's the fancy megachurch version, but there's the sort of, hey, we can pull this together and make this work because we value some way of being together when a pandemic forces us not to be in that community. So I think it's a really, Jesus didn't, do I think Jesus knew about a COVID pandemic? No, but I mean, essentially our stones were sort of blown up the way he said they were going to be. And the community persisted, and that for me, like, I it's like that retrospect, like, look at, this is just like, I don't want to say like, you're just like Jesus, you're just like Mark, but that's the connection. And that's where we get our
sitting right in the exact same place as who would have been the audience of this original of this gospel, right? Like the temple just got destroyed. The stones just got like scattered, right? And now they're sitting in this and they're listening to Jesus, hearing these words from him, from the author, right?
Right.
And so I think we're sitting in that same spot, like shit's been scattered, it's gone. We have to figure out like, what does this look like going forward? And then also to, hear these words of like, it's gonna suck. But
right. And like, we know like that temple never got rebuilt. That temple never came back to what it was before.
Yes.
But the community, the connections, the stories, the everything else lived on, like that, like, I mean, I could go on a whole rant about, our idolatry of buildings, but that's, that's neither here nor there. Like, that the smart community might have still hoped that it would get rebuilt, and that's okay too. Like, I think a multitude of community, like everyone sitting there hearing the story from Jesus was probably not in the same place, which I think is where we are too. Like everyone is having different experience. How do we get through this part of this weird ass pandemic that is lasting way longer than we thought it was going to? And we don't all agree. And we're trying to figure out how to manage this conflict as pastors and leaders and people and families. And it's like, that's, it's like, this is why this is a good text, because it tells us the truth.
And it's exhausting, right? Like my like special word to everyone out there who like, everyone's, which they, they are, I'm thinking like first responders, like and hospital staff, like putting them up on these pedestals. And I agree, they should totally be there. But also like your pastor has gone through a lot to try to, we were just talking about this too, is just continual situations where it's really tough to be a pastor right now, especially in communities that can't agree on whether or not to wear a mask, can't agree on whether or not to get vaccinated. It's really hard. And I think that this also comes at a time where there's just so many pastors sitting in churches being like, where's the ending? Like, what is this going to look like? Right? Like, because the way it is right now is not manageable and not sustainable.
Right. And in a different way than it was in 2020. Like, I think in 2020, it was, we just got to get through this and then it'll get better. And now we're in that place we thought would be better and it's not. And so that pile of bad stuff doesn't feel finite right now. It's just like, just keep pulling things out of it and it's not getting any smaller. I want the pile to get smaller. Yeah. So recognizing that too is really, I think, important, especially since we are recording this towards the end of Pastor Appreciation Month, which feels like a weird Hallmark holiday.
I didn't even know it was a thing.
There's like sections, but of course, it's all like pastor and his wife kind of gross heteronormative stuff. So it's like, I don't want you to appreciate me like that. Like, no, thank you. Don't buy me that. So yeah, appreciate your pastor. Don't buy them a yucky card.
Yeah.
Maybe like ask them how they're doing and,
And
I mean, for me, ask them how they're doing, get them a cookie. That would make me happy. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
See what they need.
Yeah.
Right?
A bottle of wine.
Yeah.
That's a great gift for a pastor. When so that was when I got ordained, you get a lot of like, really cutesy and Bible-y things. And then one of my like aunts gave me a couple of nice bottles of wine, and because she said, she's like, well, I asked a pastor, like, what is a good ordination gift? And they said wine.
Yes.
This is a very wise pastor that you have.
Yeah. Because we have enough crosses on our walls. I don't need any more of those.
Yes.
But yes, I will take wine, baked items, things like that. That makes me happy. Plants are great. I'll take a plant. That sounds good. Yeah.
I like how we've transitioned from the end of the world to buy your pastor some wine. That actually feels like a great transition to me. Like, it's just like, this is where we're at. It's good.
Right. I mean, how do you get through a tough time? You care for each other. And maybe your pastor needs wine. Maybe your pastor needs a gift card to go get a massage. Maybe your pastor, like pay attention to if your pastor has taken vacation or not. And like, are they taking care of themselves? Do they ever see their family? Do they, have they been able to connect with colleagues? Because I think, so much of what pastors do is a mystery to the people in our parish, even, and maybe in a different way too, like because of the pandemic. Like, aren't you just a producer of the worship video on Sunday morning and that's it, right?
Right.
So yeah, coming back to being a parish pastor, I'm like, oh gosh, there's a lot, and I have to like spend time making sure I take care of myself. So if I had somebody out there saying like, oh, hey, we would like you not to burn out and, have this pile of whatever, that's our metaphor, crush you, to have someone pay attention and notice, that makes you feel not alone. So it might be wine, but it might not.
Yeah. Everybody's different. It works for me.
Yeah.
Cookies work great.
Yeah. I would not refuse any cookies that come my way.
Same.
Yeah.
Super same. Anyways. Well, I just call that a wrap for the day as we divulge into more indulgences that we can get into. But thanks. Thanks, Bre, so much for coming on the podcast and for helping us celebrate what's been a great year, I think, for content guests that we've had and for the listeners. We hope that it's been a good year and that this has added a little bit of something to to your life in this crazy pandemic-y world that we have. Especially if getting to church is not one of the things that you've been able to do. So anyways, yeah, I hope you have a great holiday season. And sometime after Easter next year, we'll be back.
Yay.
That didn't sound very enthusiastic.
No, it was like, yay, it will work. It will be great.
It's going to be great. Mm-hmm. Well, that's it for this week. That's it for this year. And have a good year. And catch up on episodes maybe that you've missed. And, continue to follow on facebook.com/Should They Don't Tell You on Sunday. So you can get updates for when you'll hear when we're coming back next year for season 2. But take care, everyone.